So Brighton are about to lose Fabian Hürzeler to the Man United job. Let's get into it. Thank you very much for coming back to my channel and welcome. My name is Adam MacDonald and this is Seagulls Central, the best place for all your quickest, all your most in-depth and the best Brighton community out there on social media. As I always say, if you've been to this channel before and you haven't already done so, please hit the subscribe button, turn your notifications on and you'll be first and fastest to all my content. Let's get into it. An interesting story, not particularly massive story, but an interesting story. And it's always quite massive when clubs like Man United are involved. And we've all been scarred before in terms of Brighton losing managers to quote-unquote big clubs. And the rumours, the conversation is kind of coming up again around a Brighton manager moving on. And this time, it's Manchester United, who obviously, we all know it, we don't need to get into that, and this isn't a Man United channel, are in a pretty desperate situation. A manager who won't change the system, a manager who isn't getting the best out of the players, a manager who hasn't even been there as long as a year so far. Strong speculation about his future. Fabian Hürzeler, the Brighton boss, youngest head coach in Premier League history, has been linked to the role at Old Trafford and has been linked in the event the Man United were to make a change. Now, for what it's worth, in my opinion, I think personally Man United are way more likely to appoint someone like a Oliver Glasner, maybe an Andoni Iraola. I don't think that Fabian Hürzeler, in terms of what he's done so far for Brighton, the record he's got there, and also in terms of the competition, in terms of other Premier League managers, I don't necessarily think he would be the very top of the list in terms of managers Man United would appoint. You think about Gareth Southgate as well. But that is part of the report. Many outlets in the last week or so have reported that the top three candidates for the Man United job, if Ruben Amorim was to move on, it would be Oliver Glasner, Andoni Iraola and Fabian Hürzeler. Now, Fabian Hürzeler has spoken literally today to talkSPORT and he said this. It's everything you'd expect. He said he's focused on Brighton. This is all just purely speculation. He said it's an honour to be linked. And it would be an honour, wouldn't it? If you were a manager and your name was getting linked to the Man United job, however bad Man United are, you know that is it's a sign that things are going all right and you're doing fairly well. He says it's an honour to be linked to Man United, but he respects the current coach, Ruben Amorim, and he did stress that he's really, really happy at Brighton and actually said he feels there's still a lot to do in his role as the Seagulls head coach. And I think that's true. I think my general view around this is Fabian Hürzeler going to go to Man United? No, he's not. And the main reason for me is that I don't think he's done enough to get that role yet. I don't think he's done enough to really make that next step. We've been having conversations around how long his future will seem kind of airy-fairy and brilliant at Brighton in terms of maybe even surviving out the season. Look, that's obviously not going to happen. We know the way Tony Bloom operates. He's never going to kind of sack a manager mid-season and things aren't going really that badly. But it's not exactly like he's been, he's absolutely turned things around at Brighton. He's taken things to another level, but beyond De Zerbi. He's improved players crazy, and he's absolutely deserving. It's an obvious choice in terms of the Man United role. Look, Brighton sit 10th in the Premier League at the moment. Obviously, we had a really good result against Chelsea last week. And I think what we're seeing with this side is that it is an interesting young side. But do I think that Fabian Hürzeler personally has shown enough of a personal managerial coaching identity, philosophy, and also shown the kind of A plus B equals C kind of good coaching, good plays equals better performances? I don't think we've seen enough of that. I don't think we see enough of his actual style of play. I don't think we see enough of him really improving players. And I think maybe you could point to people like Yasin, Ayari, but I think in terms of the threshold that you want to meet, as in terms of Man United kind of making that appointment, I don't think Fabian Hürzeler necessarily qualifies for that yet. I think maybe in a year's time, maybe in 2 years' time, it might be different. I think that's obviously one of the benefits of having an incredibly young manager. I remember at the time when Graham Potter was Brighton manager, and this is all very, it's quite timely now considering his situation, the way he's out of a job again after losing the Chelsea job and then losing the West Ham job in the last 2-3 years. He would have been mid-40s at the time when he was the Brighton manager. And I remember it was actually after a game against Man United in the away end at Old Trafford. I think it was summer 2022. And I was actually speaking to someone where I said, look, this guy, there's a lot of talk around him. And he ended up going a couple of months later. There's a lot of talk around him getting big jobs. But he could be at Brighton for another 10 years and still only be 55 and still be a relatively young manager. Oliver Glasner's probably 55 or so. And he's, only just arrived in the Premier League. Potter could have You could stay a long time at Brighton and still be a young manager and then go and get these big jobs. I think Fabian Hürzeler, obviously it must be very tempting for him. It must be very flattering for him. But at 31, 32 years old as he is now, he must be in no rush. And I think you've got to look at managers like Graham Potter and other instances where it's happened across the Premier League, where actually you don't want to go too early. You don't want to do things too early. He's not under pressure week in, week out from the board, from the fan base, to the same level you get at Man United. The scrutiny isn't there. You can let your stock rise, your stock build. You can let your coaching ability develop, your experience as a Premier League manager. What an opportunity to be a Premier League manager for a club like Brighton. And he could be here for many, many years to come if he played his hands right, if he played his cards right, played his hand well. So my ultimate assessment is actually I feel like in this instance it's obviously not going to happen. It's obviously not going to happen, but it's a very, very interesting one. I think, as well, things are going to change in the next few months, in the next few weeks, in terms of the way that the structure works at Brighton. Obviously, Jason Ato coming in, Mike Cave stepping up to the technical director. The technical operation at Brighton is completely changing, and the way that Fabian Hürzeler works with these people is going to change. And I think it's an interesting time now for Brighton that we're stepping into, or actually we might begin to see over the next couple of years a change in recruitment style, a change in playing style, a focus more on certain different things around the way the sporting operation is run. And I think Fabian Hürzeler clearly is viewed as a very, very prominent part of that. An interesting thing, though, around the kind of Man United report is that they're planning on, sounds like maybe the decision around Ruben Amorim has been made. Who knows? We don't know whether it hasn't yet. But what it sounds like is that they're going to wait either way. They're going to wait until the 1 year anniversary of him being appointed, which I think is in November time. Because as a result, that kind of impacts, the compensation that they'll need to pay him personally. So any decision on whether Fabian Hürzeler were to be appointed as the Man United manager, well, it would happen after we play them. Obviously, we go there probably, I think it was a month last Sunday. I think it's or is it Saturday night game or a Sunday night game? I'm going to be there 25th of October. It's in around 4 weeks' time. So we would be playing them at Old Trafford, a few days before this kind of doomsday in terms of Ruben Amorim's future is reportedly kind of being sealed. So I think it might be one over the next month where the grumbles get a little bit louder and louder. But obviously, I think if we're all getting in the real world here, Fabian Hürzeler ain't leaving Brighton anytime soon to go to another club. I don't think he's going to be poached anytime soon. I don't think it's an issue in terms of Brighton having to stave off massive interest. I think there will be admirers. I think there'll be many, many people around the Premier League who recognise that this guy's doing a good job, and for a very young manager, the experience he's building up and the quality of work that he's done is very impressive. But the idea that he's ready to go and take on a big job, of course he's not. We're seeing him learning on the job at Brighton. We're seeing, there's many things he still needs to learn. Game management. We need to see a little bit more of a style of play. I think that development, that evolution for him is still developing, and Brighton's the perfect place to do that. I also think generally clubs like Man United, Chelsea, these big clubs who make these appointments and like to poach from teams like Brighton, is you've got to remember that the infrastructure, the system, the setup at Brighton is so much of a big part of what makes managers look good. We've seen it with Graham Potter. You could even argue to an extent, you saw it with De Zerbi, the players he was given to work with. But I do believe he is a genuinely top-class manager, De Zerbi. But, you see it with players as well, the executive technical staff, the way Brighton is set up, it makes you look very good. And I think that was a big factor perhaps in the Graham Potter thing. Obviously he was brilliant in the way that he evolved the way we played, the evolution of our style of play. We've got to give a lot of credit to him. Him and Dan Ashworth, I think, were brilliant in that in terms of bringing in the players, but also changing the style of play on the pitch. However, it's very easy to look good at Brighton. And I think you've got to remember, while Fabian Hürzeler is doing a decent job, still a learning curve. It's still a timeline for him. It's still a process. And he's got all the tools at his disposal. Man United would be very, very different, and the pressure would be very, very different. But let me know what you think. Do you think this is going to be one that over the next month, 6 weeks develops? Do you think maybe after that kind of November period comes, the pressure might mount a bit? Would you say someone like Fabian Hürzeler is ready for kind of quote-unquote a big job like that, even though Man United aren't operating at the same level that even Brighton maybe are this season? But let me know, do you think he'd be ready for that? And how do you think Brighton would be well-equipped if, say, that this situation really did materialise and suddenly Fabian Hürzeler's future at Brighton was put into doubt? How would you feel about that? Would you feel positive? Would you feel negative? And where would Brighton go next? Let me know. I'd love to know your thoughts. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you got this far in the video, please hit the subscribe button, hit your notifications, turn them on, get in the likes, get in the comments, and let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in a couple of days' time for the next video. And as always, up the Albion.